Chapter 1. The Man Who Counted the Chairs. The first thing Alaric Voss saw aboard the Santa Aurelia was not the Rock of Gibraltar. It rose behind the harbour like a sleeping animal, its back to Spain. It was a chair, cane-backed deck chair, had been placed too carefully beside the forward rail, facing neither the sea nor the town, but the narrow passage between the first-class lounge and the covered promenade. On its seat lay a folded newspaper, a pair of woman's gloves, a small paper cone of sugared almonds, already softening in the damp salt air. Voss stopped before it. He was a small, immaculate man from Lausanne, dressed in a dove-grey suit that seemed untouched by the disorder of travel. His hat sat level, gloves were buttoned. His shoes had the quiet shine of objects that had been loved without sentiment. From his breast pocket showed the narrowest strip of pale blue ribbon, folded like a secret. Beside him, a porter shifted 2 valises and coughed. "Cabin, sir. The ferry sails in 20 minutes if the harbour master keeps his temper." "In 20 minutes," Voss said. "Many people reveal themselves." The porter looked at him as one looked at a man who was tipped well, but spoke oddly. Voss took from his pocket the pale blue ribbon and tied one small knot in. Only then did he follow. The Santa Aurelia was no grand liner. She was a polished ferry that carried diplomats, merchants, officers, widows, gamblers, and those nervous travellers who wished to cross from Gibraltar to Tangier before luncheon and be elsewhere by evening. Decks smelt of brass polish, oranges, wet rope and coal smoke. Her first-class lounge had green leather chairs with cracked arms, lamps shaded in amber silk, and a barometer whose needle trembled as if it possessed a conscience. It was late March. The light had that hard Mediterranean brightness which makes every shadow look deliberate. In the harbour, gulls screamed over crates of figs and military stores. A Spanish priest argued with a customs man in a voice rich with injury. Somewhere below, Mule objected to the modern world. Voss's cabin was narrow, neat and badly ventilated. He inspected it without complaint. He placed his brushes parallel to the washstand, aligned his luggage buckle, host, and moved the little vase of artificial flowers 3 inches to the left. Then he returned to the deck. The owner of the chair had arrived. She was a woman of about 30, dressed in cream linen, with a blue scarf tied too tightly at her throat. Face was pretty, in the way a painted porcelain figure is pretty, smooth, bright, and faintly without rests. She held the softened almonds in one hand and looked toward the gangway, as though expecting someone who had already disappointed her. Near her stood a broad man with a military moustache and a cigar he had not lit. "Clara, you cannot keep a chair by occupation of accessories," he said. His voice had the expensive boredom of English clubs. "The sea is democratic. It takes chairs from duchesses and gives them to dentists. You always joke when you are cruel, Maurice. It is the one economy you practice." "I practice many economies. Feeling is merely the most sensible." She turned away, but not before Voss observed that her fingers had crushed the paper cone until sugar clung to her glove seam. Broadman noticed Voss and gave a stiff nod. "Maurice Ellingham," he said, as if presenting a bill. "My wife, Mrs. Clara Ellingham. You are travelling to Tangier." "For the moment," Voss replied. "One should never be too confident about destinations." Ellingham laughed once, without amusement. "A philosopher on a ferry. Gibraltar grows more international by the hour." Clara Ellingham looked at Voss with sudden... "You are Swiss, I think." "My mother had a Swiss clock that refused to strike unless the room was warm. I used to think it had pride. Many clocks have pride, madame. Fewer have honesty." Her mouth moved toward a smile and retreated. A bell rang below. Passengers began to gather as the final luggage came aboard. Voss watched them with the mild attentiveness of a man admiring a shop window. There was Mr. Raphael Benatar, a Tangier shipping agent, narrow-shouldered and beautifully dressed, whose rings flashed whenever he spoke. He addressed every man as my friend, and every woman as though she might become one. There was Miss Elspeth Vale, travel writer of severe middle age, carrying 3 notebooks, and a face arranged against disappointment. There was Father Tomas Avelar, priest who had argued on the quay, now wiping his spectacles with a square of cloth embroidered with red initials. There was Lieutenant Hugh Ardley, young, sunburnt, and too eager to be casual. He stood near Clara Ellingham without standing beside her. Last came a woman in a plain brown coat, carrying a black medical bag. She boarded without assistance. She paused at the rail to look back at Gibraltar, not with nostalgia, but with calculation. Her hair was iron grey, her face unadorned, and her mouth had the controlled gentleness of someone accustomed to being trusted in rooms where people were afraid. "Dr. Martha Kessler," murmured the porter near Voss. "German lady. Works in Tangier Hospital, they say. Quiet sort, always pays the exact fare." Dr. Kessler crossed the deck. A child stumbled near her. She caught him by the elbow before anyone else had moved, steadied him, returned him to his mother with a brief sentence in Spanish. The mother thanked her too warm. Dr. Kessler seemed embarrassed by gratitude and escaped into the lounge. Voss untied the knot in his ribbon, then tied it again, tighter. The ferry shuddered. Ropes dropped. The quay began to move away with that curious trick of travel by water, in which the earth appears to depart and the vessel seems innocent. At luncheon, first-class passengers were arranged at 2 long tables bolted to the dining saloon floor. The saloon smelled of boiled fish, lemon peel, varnish, faint dampness trapped forever in odd upholstery. Above the tables, small fans turned with no conviction. Voss sat near the end, opposite Miss Vale, beside Father Abelard. The Ellinghams occupied the centre, as people accustomed to centre places often do without asking. Lieutenant Ardley sat 2 seats away from Clara, pretending not to count the distance. Mr. Benatar moved from guest to guest with the social ease of a man who owed money in several currencies. Dr. Kessler sat near the door. She ate little. She watched no one. That, to Voss, meant she was watching very carefully. Maurice Ellingham drank heavily from the start. He complained about the soup, the ferry company, Spanish customs, the decline of English tailoring, the habit of modern women to cultivate opinion. "My wife has lately discovered morality," lifting his glass. "Dangerous hobby for a woman. It begins with charity committees and ends with separate bedroom." Clara's spoon touched her bowl, made the smallest sound. Lieutenant Ardley flushed. "That is hardly fair, Ellingham. Mrs. Ellingham has been working with refugee children in Tangier. Everyone knows she has given a great deal of time. Time, yes. Money, perhaps. Admiration, certainly." Ellingham turned his lazy gaze upon the young officer. "Do you collect causes, too, Ardley, or only the ladies who support them?" The table changed, not visibly, more like a hand tightening under cloth. Miss Vale wrote something in her notebook. Father Abelard looked down at his bread. Mr. Benatar gave a soft laugh and spread his jewelled hand. "My dear sir, on a ferry one must not quarrel before the coffee. It offends digestion and alarms the cook." "The cook deserves alarm," Ellingham said. "So do several others." Clara rose. "I shall take the air," she said. Her voice was controlled, but her scarf had shifted. Beneath it, the base of her throat, Voss saw a faint yellow bruise, nearly hidden by powder. Lieutenant Ardley half rose with. She did not look at him. "Please don't be kind just now. It would make everything more difficult." She left. Ellingham watched her go and smiled into his wine. Voss took the pepper pot, turned it once, and set it exactly as it had been. Father Abelard noticed. "You disapprove of the disorder, monsieur?" "I disapprove of a disorder when it pretends to be an accident." The priest's fingers tightened around his glass. "On boats, many things move without intention. Bodies move, yes. Chairs less often." Father Abelard did not answer at once. He glanced toward the deck door. "Speak, as if you have already found a sermon in the furniture." "A sermon, father, is often only a fact dressed for church." Miss Vale looked up from her notebook. "That is good. May I use it?" "I would advise against it," Voss said. "It is not yet proven." After luncheon, the wind freshened. The Santa Aurelia pushed into the strait, where the water carried 2 colours at once, dark blue beneath and a livid green where the currents crossed. Africa lay ahead, low and pale. Gibraltar diminished behind them, losing detail but not authority. Voss walked the promenade deck. The cane chair remained by the forward rail. The gloves were gone. The newspaper had been refolded, but badly. A corner of one page showed a small advertisement circled in pencil. "Room to let, Rue des Orangeres, Tangier. Private entrance, no questions asked." Voss did not touch it. Behind him, Miss Vale's dry voice said, "You inspect chairs as other men inspect women." "Chairs are more honest, mademoiselle. They retain the shape of what has burdened. That is almost indecently poetic. I apologize. You do not mean that. Men like you apologize for the way cats blink. She came to stand beside him. Her notebooks were tied with string. One pencil had been sharpened down to an angry stump. You are not merely travelling, she said. I have spent 20 years watching people pretend to be ordinary. You are pretending with some skill, not enough. I am going to Tangier because I was invited to examine an insurance fraud involving carpets. That sounds dull enough to be true. It is often the dull cases that reveal the extravagant sins. Miss Vale's eyes moved toward the lounge window. Inside, Dr. Kessler was speaking to Clara Ellingham. The doctor's posture was reserved. Clara was desperate. Her hands moved quickly, then stopped when Maurice Ellingham appeared behind them. He said something. Clara went still. Dr. Kessler looked at with professional calm. Maurice laughed, bowed with mock courtesy, and passed out of sight. Miss Vale said, "There is a marriage one could write without invention. One should be careful," Voss replied. "A marriage seen from outside is often only a theatre poster. It tells you the title, not the play. Yet you looked. I count exits. From marriages, from rooms." She laughed, but softly. "You are an odd little man, Monsieur Voss." Many people have found comfort in that conclusion. At 4 o'clock, tea was served in the lounge. The room had grown warmer. Brass lamps gave off a faint, metallic smell. Cups rattled in their saucers as the ferry met the uneven water of the strait. Clara Ellingham did not appear. Maurice did. He entered cheerfully, too cheerfully, and asked for whisky instead of tea. His face was flushed. His hair, carefully parted at luncheon, had loosened over his forehead. He carried himself with the false ease of a man performing indifference for an audience he despises. "My wife has been taken to her cabin," he announced to no one in particular. "The sea makes martyrs of the delicate." Tenant Ardley stood by the window. Perhaps someone should see whether she needs assistance. Perhaps someone should mind his own uniform. Dr. Kessler looked up from her cup. "If Mrs. Ellingham is unwell, I will call upon her. There is no need for a public argument over a private discomfort." Ellingham turned toward her. "Doctor, I distrust women who carry black bags. They always look as though they are prepared either to heal a man or bury him." Dr. Kessler's expression did not change. "That is because men so often arrange matters until only those two services remain." Mr. Benatar laughed with genuine pleasure. Father Avlar made a small sound that might have been disapproval or concealed amusement. Voss watched Ellingham's hand. The man's right cuff was damp, not wet enough for seawater, not stained enough for wine. Damp only along the inner edge, though he had washed one wrist in haste and missed the cloth. Voss took out the pale blue ribbon. He tied a second knot. At 4:30, the steward came into the lounge looking irritated rather than frightened. "Beg pardon, sir," he said to Ellingham. "Cabin bell has been pulled 3 times, but when I knock there is no answer. The door's bolted from inside, as far as I can tell." Ellingham stared at him. For 1 second, and only one, his face forgot the expression it had chosen. Then he smiled. "My wife enjoys drama. She has married into the wrong profession, but she practices daily." Dr. Kessler set down her cup. "We should go." "I did not invite a procession," Ellingham said. Voss rose, smoothing his gloves finger by finger. "A procession, monsieur, is merely a crowd walking in the same direction. It becomes useful when someone at the front knows why." They went below. The passage to the cabins was narrow, lined with varnished wood that sweated in the heat from the engine. The carpet runner smelled faintly of damp wool and carbolic soap. Steward stood outside cabin 6, twisting his cap in both hands. The door was bolted. From inside came no movement. Ellingham knocked once. "Clara, stop this foolishness. You are inconveniencing strangers, which is usually my privilege, sir." Dr. Kessler listened to the panel. "Break it." The steward fetched a deckhand. The bolt splintered on the second blow. The cabin opened. Clara Ellingham lay on the floor beside the lower berth. One hand caught in the strap of her travelling case. Her blue scarf had come loose. Her eyes were half open, with an expression not of terror, post, but of astonishment, as though death had interrupted her in the middle of a sentence. On the washstand stood a glass. Beside it lay a small paper cone of sugared almonds, empty except for white dust. Dr. Kessler knelt. She touched Clara's wrist, then her throat. Face became not hard, but older. "She is dead," the doctor said. "Not long, perhaps less than an hour." Ardley made a sound and struck his shoulder against the wall. Maurice Ellingham gripped the doorframe. Damp cuff brushed the broken wood. Voss did not look at the body first. He looked at the porthole. It was open. The cabin was too high above the water for anyone to enter from outside. The brass rim held one tiny smear of blue powder, the same shade as Clara Ellingham's scarf. Then Voss looked down. On the floor, close to the dead woman's left shoe, lay a sugared almond, unbroken, white as a little tooth. Voss bent but did not touch it. Behind him, Ellingham said, "She killed herself. She was always theatrical. She must have taken something." Dr. Kessler stood slowly. "Do not be stupid merely because grief has made itself inconvenient." Ellingham stared at her with a hatred too quick to be born from grief. Voss looked from the glass to the almond, from the open porthole to the torn strap of the travelling case. Then he untied both knots in the pale blue ribbon and tied a third. "My friends," he said gently, "this cabin has been made to tell a story." Father Abelard crossed himself in the passage. Miss Vale whispered, almost to herself, "Stories lie." Voss turned toward the broken door. "Sometimes," he said, "they lie most carefully when they have been written by someone who believes himself misunderstood." At that moment, from inside Clara Ellingham's half-open travelling case, something shifted and fell against the leather. It was not clothing. It was a sealed envelope, addressed in her hand to Alaric Voss. Chapter 2. The envelope that should not exist. The envelope did not fall far. It slid only an inch against the leather lining. But in the small cabin, where breath seemed too loud, and grief had not yet found its proper shape, the sound was enough to redirect every gaze. Alaric Voss did not reach for it at once. He had already noticed the hand that had written his name was a precise hand, controlled, with a slight backward slant that suggested caution learned late in life. The ink had not bled. The envelope had been sealed carefully, the flap pressed flat without haste. Clara Ellingham had prepared this. Not in panic, not at the moment of death. Before, Voss inclined his head a fraction, as if acknowledging a courtesy extended across time. "Doctor," he said quietly, "you will forgive me if I ask whether anything in this room must be touched immediately for the sake of your profession." Dr. Martha Kessler looked at him with the steady regard of someone who has been asked questions badly all her life and recognizes when one is asked properly. "The body should not be moved until I have examined her more closely," she said. "But the rest," she glanced around the cabin, "the rest has already been disturbed by the breaking of the door, by our presence, by the very fact of death. If there is something that concerns you, you may take it. Only do not pretend you do so lightly." "I never pretend lightly," Voss replied. He bent then, carefully, and lifted the envelope from the open case. It was heavier than paper alone. Inside, something thin and rigid lay against the fold. A second sheet, perhaps, or a photograph. He did not yet open it. Maurice Ellingham watched him. "You appear to have received my wife's final confidence," he said, his voice dry in a way that suggested thirst rather than restraint. "How?" "Touching. You must have made quite an impression in the hour you knew her." "I have found," Voss said, turning the envelope once between his fingers, "that impressions are often made long before introductions occur. That is nonsense. It is only inconvenient." Lieutenant Ardley stepped forward, face pale with a heat that had nothing to do with the engine room below. "If Mrs. Ellingham wrote to you—" He stopped, swallowed, began again. "If she wrote something important, perhaps it should be read now. There might be some indication of what happened." "Doctor." Kessler glanced at him, not unkindly. "Young man, there are many things one wishes to know immediately after a death. Few of them are improved by haste." Miss Vale, who had managed to appear in the doorway without anyone noticing precisely when she had arrived, from behind her notebooks. "And yet, Doctor, we are in the middle of the sea. Privacy has already been denied us. If there is a document that changes the nature of this event, I should prefer to be inconvenienced sooner rather than later." Father Abelard murmured something under his breath that might have been a prayer or an apology. Voss looked at the envelope once more. Then he slid it into the inner pocket of his coat. "I will read it," he said, "when it becomes necessary." Ellingham laughed, a short sharp sound. "How very Swiss of you. Order before curiosity, method before emotion. My wife lies dead, and you speak of necessity as if you were arranging a cupboard." "I arrange many things, monsieur," Voss said gently. "Cupboards among them. One learns in time. That disorder is most dangerous when it appears justified." Ellingham's eyes narrowed. For a moment, something like calculation moved behind them. Then he turned away. "This is absurd," he said. "She was unhappy. She has done something foolish. The doctor will confirm it, and we shall all be spared the melodrama of suspicion." Dr. Kessler did not answer him. She knelt again beside Clara Ellingham and began a more careful examination. Her movements were economical, precise. She lifted the woman's wrist, then her hand. She studied the lips, the eyes, the faint discoloration at the throat, where the scarf had pressed. "Tell me," she said without looking up, "did Mrs. Ellingham suffer from any illness? Did she take any regular medicine?" Ellingham shrugged. His shoulders were tighter now. "She took tonics. Women always take tonics. For nerves, for complexion, for whatever fashionable complaint is being discussed in drawing rooms that week." "That is not an answer. It is the only one I have, Doctor." Kessler's fingers paused at the edge of Clara's jaw. "She has not died from drowning," she said, "nor from any injury I can see. There is a stiffness beginning in the hand. The muscles—" She stopped, chose a simpler phrase. "They have seized. It is not the way one dies from sorrow alone." Lieutenant Ardley leaned against the wall, as if the narrow passage had shifted under him. "Poison," he said. The word seemed to settle in the cabin like a guest no one had invited. Mr. Benatar followed the others below, and now stood just beyond the threshold, spread his hands again, though less elegantly than before. "My friends, we must be careful. On a ship, words travel faster than water. If we speak of poison, we must also speak of who carries it, who gives it, drinks it. These are not polite topics for an afternoon crossing." Miss Vale's pencil moved rapidly. "It is precisely the topic we have," she said, "and politeness has already been dismissed." Voss stepped closer to the washstand. The glass stood where it had been placed. There was a faint residue at the bottom, cloudy against the clear surface. Beside it, the empty paper cone lay crumpled, its inner lining dusted with sugar that had begun to clump in humidity. He did not touch either. Instead, he leaned slightly, bringing his face closer to the rim of the glass, without quite lowering himself to smell it. "Doctor," he said, "would a substance taken with something sweet, perhaps these almonds, mask its presence?" Dr. Kessler looked up. "It might," she said. "There are substances that have a bitterness, a sharpness, that one could disguise with sugar. But it would depend on the quantity, the preparation, the person administering it, and the person receiving it. Yes." Clara Ellingham's hand lay open on the floor, her fingers slightly curled, as if she had tried to grasp something that had already escaped her. Voss's gaze moved to the sugared almond near her shoe. It had not been crushed. It had not been eaten. It had been dropped. "Curious," he murmured. "What is curious?" Miss Vale asked without looking up. "That one almond should remain." Ellingham snorted. "You are building a philosophy out of confectionery." "On the contrary," Voss said, "I am observing that if a person intends to eat a sweet, one usually eats all of it, or none. To eat almost all, and leave one, this suggests interruption." "Death is a form of interruption," Ellingham said. "Yes," Voss replied, "but not always at the moment one expects." He straightened. "Doctor, you will examine Mrs. Ellingham further. I would ask that no one enter this cabin unnecessarily. We are not yet certain what we are dealing with, but we may assume it is not simple." Ellingham's voice sharpened. "You give instructions as if you were in charge." "I give suggestions," Voss said. "You may ignore them, but you will find that reality does not." For a moment it seemed Ellingham might protest further. Then he looked at Clara's body. Something in his expression shifted. Not grief, not quite, but a recognition that the situation had moved beyond his control. "Do as you like," he said. "I am going on deck." He left abruptly, his steps uneven in the narrow passage. Lieutenant Ardley hesitated, then followed as if pulled by a thread he could neither see nor break. Vale remained. "So," she said softly, "we have a dead woman, a husband who drinks, a young officer who cannot decide whether to be brave or discreet, a doctor who knows more than she says, and now a letter addressed to you. It is almost disappointingly structured." "Structure is often the enemy of truth," Voss said, "and yet you rely on it." "I rely on what resists it." She looked at him with a kind of reluctant respect. "I shall be very careful what I write," she said. "You make one feel that inaccuracies might be noticed." "There usually are," Voss replied, "only not always by the right people." He turned and left the cabin. The passage felt narrower on the way out. The air was thicker. Somewhere above, a chair scraped against the deck, small domestic sound that seemed absurdly out of place. On the promenade, the light had changed. The sea was darker now, the green currents less visible, the blue deepening towards something almost black. The wind carried a sharper edge. Passengers moved more quickly. The crossing had become something to be completed rather than enjoyed. Maurice Ellingham stood by the rail, his back to the others, not looking at the sea. He was looking at his reflection in the glass of the lounge window. Voss approached him. "You have lost your wife," he said. Ellingham did not turn. "I have lost a complication," he replied. "You will forgive me if I do not perform grief for an audience. Grief is rarely convincing when performed. Then you should appreciate my restraint." Voss stood beside him, not too close. "You washed your wrist," he said. Ellingham's reflection flickered. "What? Your cuff," Voss continued, as if discussing a minor detail of tailoring. "It is damp along the inner edge. Not from the sea, not from your drink. One washes the hands, perhaps, but forgets the wrist." Ellingham turned then, quickly. "You are suggesting something," he said, his voice low. "I am observing something," Voss replied. "Suggestion come later. Think I poisoned her." "I think," Voss said, "that it would be very convenient if everyone thought so." Ellingham stared at him. For a moment, the arrogance fell away. In its place was something else, something sharper, more alert. "You are not what you pretend," he said. "I have made no such claim." Ellingham gave a short laugh. "Very well, Monsieur Voss. Play your little game. Ask your questions. Inspect your almond. But understand this. Whatever you think you see, you do not know my wife. That," Voss said quietly, "is precisely what interests." Behind them, Dr. Kessler emerged from below. Her face had changed. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would alarm a casual observer. Voss noticed that she had removed her gloves and was folding them carefully, as one does when preparing to speak plainly. "She did not take the poison willingly," the doctor said. Miss Vale looked up sharply. "How can you be certain?" Dr. Kessler met her gaze. "Because she tried to resist. There are marks, small but clear. Not enough for a struggle, enough for hesitation, enough for fear." The wind rose. Somewhere forward, a bell rang once, as if marking an hour no one had agreed upon. Voss took out the pale blue ribbon. He untied the third knot. Then, very slowly, he tied a fourth. "Then we must consider," he said, "not why she died." He paused, looking toward the horizon where Africa waited, pale and indifferent. "But why did she believe she might not survive this crossing at all?" Chapter 3. The Room That Knew Too Much. The letter began not with a greeting but with an apology. Voss did not read it on deck. He waited until the ferry had settled into that uneasy rhythm between departure and arrival, the moment when passengers lose interest in one shore, but have not yet invented expectations for the next. It was a private interval, poorly understood and therefore useful. He chose the smoking room. It was empty at that hour. The air still carried traces of stale tobacco, polished wood, and the faint medicinal scent of spilled spirits, long since wiped but not forgotten. The windows were streaked with salt. Outside, the sea moved with a deliberate heaviness, as if conserving strength for something yet to come. Voss closed the door behind him. He removed the envelope with the same care he might use to handle a fragile instrument. He did not break the seal immediately. Instead, he placed it flat on the table and examined it again. Clara Ellingham had written his name with certainty. No hesitation, no correction, no ink blot. She had known exactly who he was. Voss opened it. Inside were 2 sheets. The first was the letter, the second a photograph. He set the photograph aside without looking at it yet. The letter read, "You will forgive the presumption, Monsieur Voss. Been told you are a man who observes what others prefer not to see. If this is not true, then I have made a mistake, and I hope it will be a harmless one. If it is true, then I must ask you to believe something difficult. My husband intends to kill me." Voss's expression did not change. He read on. "He will not do it in anger. That would be too simple, and he despises simplicity. He will do it in such a way that it appears either my own choice or an unfortunate accident. He has spoken of this more than once, always as a joke, always with that particular tone he uses when he wishes to test how much I understand. I understand enough. You may think I exaggerate. Many people do. Maurice is charming when he wishes to be. He has cultivated that skill carefully. One cultivates a garden. One never intends to visit. But there is something else. The handwriting tightened slightly here. There is a woman in Tangier. Not as you might suppose, not a lover. Something more dangerous. Someone who knows something about him he cannot allow to exist. I have seen them together once. Only once. That was enough. I do not know her name. I know only that she carries a black medical bag, and that she looks at him as if she has already measured him for something. He cannot escape. Voss's eyes lifted, just briefly. Dr. Marta Kessler. He returned to the letter. If anything should happen to me on this crossing, I ask that you do not accept the obvious explanation. Maurice is not as clever as he believes, but he is patient. Patience can imitate intelligence for a very long time. There is also the matter of the room. Voss's fingers pointed. The room in Tangier, the one on Rue des Oranges. I found the advertisement among his papers. He claimed it was nothing. He always claims things are nothing. He has arranged for it to be ready. If I am wrong, then I have wronged him by writing this. I accept that. But if I am right, the sentence did not finish. Instead, there was a single line beneath it. Do not trust what appears arranged. The letter ended there. No signature. Flourish. Only the impression of a hand that had stopped before it had decided whether to continue. Voss folded the letter once, precisely, placed it back on the table. Then he reached for the photograph. It was small, slightly worn at the edges, if it had been carried rather than kept. The image showed a narrow street, Tangier, unmistakably, with its sloping white walls and shuttered windows. A door stood half open. Above it a sign barely visible, Rue des Oranges. In the doorway stood two figures. One was Maurice Ellingham. He was younger in the photograph, or perhaps simply less tired. He stood at ease, one hand in his pocket, his expression relaxed in a way Voss had yet seen aboard the ferry. The other figure was a woman. She stood slightly behind him, one hand resting on the doorframe. Her face was turned toward the camera, but not fully, enough to see the line of her jaw, the calm set of her mouth. She held a black medical bag. Voss studied the image. There was something else. Detail so small it might have been overlooked entirely. In the glass of the window beside the door, a reflection, not off the street, not of the figures, but of a third presence, indistinct, blurred, but unmistakably there. Someone had been watching them, someone who had not intended to be seen. Voss placed the photograph beside the letter. Then he took out the pale blue ribbon. He untied the fourth knot. He did not tie another. Instead, he smoothed the ribbon flat between his fingers, considering whether the next knot would be different from the others. A sound at the door interrupted him. Not a knock, a hesitation. Then Miss Vale's voice, careful and almost polite. "May I come in, or shall I continue pretending I am not listening outside?" "You may come in," Voss said. She entered, closing the door behind her. "I dislike corridors," she said. "They encourage speculation without evidence. That is their principal function." She glanced at the table. "You have read it?" "Yes." "And?" Voss did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned the photograph slightly, angling it toward the light. Miss Vale stepped closer. She saw Maurice Ellingham first, then the woman. Expression sharpened. "The doctor," she said, "or someone very much like her." "Very much like her," Voss agreed. Miss Vale leaned in further. "And this?" She pointed to the reflection. "That is not an accident?" "No," she straightened. "So Mrs. Ellingham believed her husband intended to kill her, and she suspected a connection with the doctor. That is already more structure than I prefer. Begins to feel like a story that has been arranged in advance." "Yes," Voss said quietly, "it does. And you dislike arrangements." "Distrust them," he replied, "especially when they invite belief." Miss Vale watched him for a moment. "You think the letter is misleading." "I think it is honest," Voss said, "which is more dangerous." "That is an odd distinction." "Honesty reveals what a person believes," Voss said, "not necessarily what is true." She considered that. "And what did Mrs. Ellingham?" "That she was in danger," Voss said, "and that the danger had a shape she could recognize." "And you?" Voss looked at the photograph again. "I believe she was correct," he said. "Not in the way she intended." Miss Vale smiled faintly. "You are insufferably precise. It is a habit." "And the husband?" "He is what he appears to be," Voss said, "which is rarely the case." "And the doctor?" Voss folded the photograph once more and returned it to the envelope. "She is more interesting," he said. Miss Vale crossed her arms. "That is not an answer. It is the beginning of one." Outside, the ferry shifted. The engines altered their rhythm slightly, a subtle change that suggested adjustment rather than distress. The sound travelled through the wall, through the floor, into the bones. Miss Vale glanced toward the door. "They are saying the captain has been informed," she said. "There will be questions. Formal ones, statements, perhaps. You will enjoy that, I imagine. I enjoy accuracy, Voss said. Questions are merely a method, and answers, he said, are often a performance. She looked at him sharply. You think someone is already performing? I think, Voss said, rising, we are all performing. He moved to the door, then paused. One more thing, he added. Yes, the chair on deck, he said. The one with the almond. It was placed to face the passage, not the sea. Miss Vale frowned. And? Person who wishes to be seen sits facing people, Voss said. A person who wishes to watch sits facing movement. And Mrs. Ellingham, she wished to see, Voss said, and to be seen. Miss Vale's expression softened unexpectedly. That is a sad distinction. Yes, Voss said. It often is. He opened the door. The corridor beyond was no longer empty. Voices moved through it now, low, controlled, uncertain. The news had spread. Not fully, not accurately, but enough to change the air. Dr. Kessler stood at the far end, speaking quietly with Father Avalar. Maurice Ellingham was nowhere to be seen. Lieutenant Ardley paced near the stairwell, his hands clenched and unclenched in a rhythm that suggested he was arguing with himself and losing. Voss stepped into the corridor. Miss Vale followed. Where now? Voss looked once toward the closed cabin door, then toward the deck. Now, he said, we begin to separate what was meant to be seen from what was not. And how do you propose to do that? Voss adjusted his gloves. With patience, he said, and by listening very carefully to what people do not say. As they moved toward the stairs, Dr. Kessler's voice carried faintly toward them. Not immediate, she was saying, but inevitable, once taken. Father Avalar murmured something in reply. Voss did not slow, but he noticed, and somewhere just beyond the rhythm of the engine, just beneath the surface of the crossing, something in the case had shifted. Not the facts, the direction. It had done so quietly enough that only a man who counted chairs and the spaces between them would feel it. Chapter 4. The question, no one asked. Captain preferred to conduct authority as though it were an inconvenience. He received them in a narrow office just off the bridge, a room with maps pinned too carefully to the walls, brass compass, mounted above a desk scarred by years of restrained frustration, and a window that showed the sea not as beauty, but as responsibility. Captain Luis Herrera was a man whose uniform fit him better than his patients did. Beard was trimmed with mathematical precision, and his eyes carried the permanent fatigue of someone who had spent too many years correcting people's mistakes. He did not rise when they entered. This is a ferry, he said, without preamble. Not a courtroom, not a theatre, certainly not a place for speculation. Miss Vale took a chair, uninvited. Psst. And yet you have both a death and a room full of people who believe they understand it. That tends to create theatre, whether one wishes it or not. Herrera's gaze flicked toward her, then to Voss. And you? I am merely travelling, Voss said. Herrera's expression suggested he did not believe in such creatures. Yes, he said. I have been told. Dr. Kessler stood near the door, black bag resting against her leg. She did not sit. Father Avalar remained beside her, hands folded. Prayer might still be negotiated with circumstance. Herrera tapped a pencil against the desk. A woman is dead in her cabin, he said. The door was bolted from the inside. There are no signs of struggle that would satisfy a sailor, which is to say no broken furniture and no blood. The doctor suggests poison. Her husband suggests foolishness. I suggest that we arrive in Tangier without turning this vessel into a story told badly. Miss Vale smiled faintly. Stories are rarely told well when they are being lived. Herrera ignored her. I will take statements, he said. Brief ones, useful ones. If anyone has information that alters the situation from unfortunate to criminal, they may present it now. Silence followed. Not the kind that lacks sound, but the kind that waits to see who will break first. Voss watched the room. Dr. Kessler's hands were still, but not relaxed. She held her gloves too carefully, as though they had become objects of significance. Father Avalar's gaze remained lowered, yet his shoulders had drawn inward, posture of a man who has remembered something he preferred to forget. Miss Vale's pencil hovered above her notebook, not writing, but ready. Captain Herrera. Herrera was not watching a small, ordinary clock mounted above the door, ticking with a dry, persistent sound that suggested it had no opinion on death but insisted upon time. Voss tilted his head slightly. Then he spoke. Captain, he said, May I ask, at what time was the cabin bell first rung? Herrera frowned. The question was not the one he had expected. The steward reports it at approximately 4:15, he said. Then again at 4:17, and again at 4:20. He delayed, assuming some trivial matter, until he found the door bolted. And the body was discovered shortly after? Yes. Voss nodded. And Mrs. Ellingham was last seen alive. Miss Vale answered before Herrera could. At luncheon, she said. She left before the coffee. That would have been, 3:30? Perhaps a little earlier. 3:28, Father Avila said quietly. They all looked at him. He seemed almost surprised by his own precision. I noticed, he said, as if apologizing for the act. She left just before the second bell for coffee. I remember because I had intended to speak with her, and then decided against it. Voss inclined his head. So, he said, we have a window of less than an hour. Herrera's impatience sharpened. And what does that give us? Monsieur Voss, a timetable? We are at sea. Time is all we have. Not entirely, Voss said. We also have a sequence. Miss Vale leaned forward slightly. That sounds promising. Only if one enjoys disappointment, Voss replied. He turned to Dr. Kessler. Doctor, you indicated that Mrs. Ellingham did not take the poison willingly. That is correct, and that death would not have been immediate. No, there would have been a period, short but noticeable, during which she understood something was wrong. Minutes, perhaps. 5, 10, it depends. Voss nodded. So she would have had time, he said, to act. Herrera tapped the pencil again. To act how? To summon assistance, Voss said. To ring the bell. A pause. Miss Vale's pencil touched the paper, then stopped. You are suggesting, she said slowly. The bell was rung by Mrs. Ellingham herself. I am suggesting, Voss said, that if she had the ability to summon help, she would have used it. She did, Herrera said. 3 times. Yes, Miss Vale's eyes narrowed. Then what is the problem? Voss looked at her. The problem, he said, is that no one came until after the 3rd ringing. Herrera's expression hardened. The steward delayed. That is unfortunate, but not unusual. Perhaps, Voss said. But consider if a person rings once and receives no response, they may wait. If they ring twice, they may become impatient. If they ring 3 times in quick succession, they are in distress. Miss Vale finished. Yes. And yet, Voss said, the door was bolted from the inside. The room was intact. There was no sign that anyone had attempted to leave. Herrera leaned back slightly. You are implying something, he said. I am observing something, Voss replied. The sequence does not align with the appearance. Miss Vale closed her notebook. You think the bell was not rung by the person who died? I think, Voss said, the bell was rung by someone who wished it to appear so. The room shifted, not visibly, not dramatically, but the idea entered it and refused to leave. Herrera's gaze sharpened. That would require someone to be inside the cabin after she was already incapacitated, he said, and to leave without unbolting the door. Yes, that is impossible. Few things are impossible, Voss said. Many are merely inconvenient. Dr. Kessler spoke then, her voice calm but firmer than before. There is another possibility, she said. Poison was administered in such a way that she did not immediately understand what had happened. She might have rung the bell once in confusion, then again as her condition worsened. And the 3rd ringing, Miss Vale? Dr. Kessler hesitated. It would be unusual, she admitted. Unusual, Voss repeated softly. He walked to the window. Outside, the sea had darkened further. The horizon was no longer a line, but a suggestion. Ferry moved through it, as though entering something less certain water. Captain, he said without turning, who has access to the master keys for the cabins? Herrera did not answer immediately. Senior crew, he said at last. The steward, myself. In an emergency, others. And were any used? The steward reports no. Reports, Miss Vale murmured. Herrera shot her a look. Are you accusing my crew of negligence or dishonesty? I am observing, she said lightly, that reports are often written after events, not during them. Voss turned back. There is another matter, he said. Herrera exhaled slowly. Of course there is. The porthole, Voss said, was open. Herrera frowned. That is not unusual. Passengers open them for air. Yes, Voss said. This one had a trace of powder on the rim. Dr. Kessler's head lifted slightly. What kind of powder? Blue, Voss said. The same shade as Mrs. Ellingham's scarf. Miss Vale's eyes flicked toward him. And do you think that matters? I think, Voss said, If one wished to suggest an entry or exit through the porthole, one might arrange for a mark that implies contact. Herrera's expression shifted. You are saying someone attempted to create the impression of intrusion. I am saying, Voss replied, the room has been arranged. Silence again, not waiting this time. Thinking, Father Avallard spoke, almost reluctantly. She feared something, he said. She spoke to me briefly before the luncheon. Not directly, not clearly, but she said, he paused, searching for the words, that sometimes danger does not arrive. It is prepared. Miss Vale looked at him sharply. And you did not think to mention this earlier? I did not understand it, he said quietly, and I still do not. Voss inclined his head. It is enough that you remember. Herrera stood then. This is becoming. He stopped, choosing a different word. Complicated. Yes, Voss said. It is. And you believe, Herrera continued, that someone aboard this ferry has staged the scene of a suicide or an accident in order to conceal a murder. I believe, Voss said. Someone wishes us to believe. Herrera stared at him. That is not helpful. It is precise. Miss Vale let out a small breath. I begin to see the shape of it, she said. A letter that directs suspicion. A husband who behaves badly enough to be convincing. Doctor who appears in a photograph. A room that tells a story too neatly. And a bell, Voss said. Yes, she said. The bell. He looked at her. What question have we not asked? Miss Vale frowned. We have asked who, how, and why. And yet, Voss said softly, we have not asked. He paused. The clock above the door ticked. Once, twice, when the story began. Miss Vale's eyes widened slightly. You think it began before the ferry? I think, Voss said, that by the time we boarded, the ending had already been written, Doctor. Kessler's gaze met his. For the first time there was something in it that was not merely professional, something closer to recognition. Then we are already late, she said. Voss smiled very faintly. On the contrary, he said, we are exactly on time. Outside, the sea shifted again, and somewhere aboard the Santa Aurelia, unnoticed by those who believed themselves attentive, door that had been left slightly ajar, closed with a soft, deliberate click. Chapter 5. The kindness that arrives too early. It was the hour when conversation grew careful. Not quiet, never quiet, but careful. Words were chosen with a precision that suggested not thoughtfulness, but fear of consequence. Ferry had entered that peculiar middle distance where land could not yet be claimed and departure no longer reassured. People moved, but without direction. They stood, but without purpose. Even laughter seemed to check itself before committing. Alaric Voss stood near the forward railing. The cane chair remained. It had been moved. Not far, only a few inches, but enough that its legs no longer aligned with the faint impressions left earlier in the deck's painted surface. The sugared almond cone was gone entirely now. In its place lay a folded napkin, white, unmarked, and quite unnecessary. Voss regarded it as one might regard a sentence added to a finished paragraph. He did not sit. Behind him, footsteps approached, with the faint impatience of someone rehearsing their words as they walked. Tenant Hugh Ardley stopped just short of Voss's shoulder. I hoped I might find you here, he said, and then, as if correcting himself, added, I suppose that sounds rather like I had no other place to look, which is not quite what I mean. It is sufficient, Voss said. Clarity is often overrated. Ardley exhaled. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, he said. They will ask questions. The captain already has that look, like a man who expects everything to be simpler than it is. And Ellingham, he stopped, pressed his lips together. Ellingham behaves as if nothing has happened, or worse, as if something has happened, but not to him. That, Voss said, is often how people behave when they believe themselves the author of events. Ardley turned sharply. You think he did it? I think, Voss replied, that it would be very convenient if you believed so. The young officer flushed. I don't need convenience, he said. I need the truth. And yet, Voss said gently, you are already holding a version of it. Ardley ran a hand through his hair. I knew her, he said. Not well. Not, he hesitated. Not in the way you may be thinking, but I knew enough. She was not foolish, not careless. She would not have taken something dangerous without knowing what it was. And you believe someone gave it to her? Yes. And that someone is her husband. Ardley looked toward the sea. I cannot imagine who else it would be, he said. Can you? Voss did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached out and adjusted the napkin on the chair by a fraction. aligning its edge with the cane frame. Then he said, "Tell me about your last conversation with Mrs. Ellingham." Ardley blinked. "My last, it was nothing. A few words on deck. She asked about the crossing, whether it was always so crowded. I said it depended on the season. She laughed a little. Not much. Did she say anything that did not belong to the conversation?" Ardley frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Voss said, "did she speak as though she were answering a question you had not asked?" Ardley considered this. Then slowly he nodded. "Yes," he said. "Yes, she did." "What did she say?" "She said—" He paused, searching for the exact words. "She said that some journeys are chosen for you. By the time you realize it, you are already on the wrong one." Voss's fingers moved once against the pale blue ribbon in his pocket. "How did she say it?" Ardley gave a short, uncertain laugh. "As if it were a joke," he said. "But she did not look at me when she said it. She was watching the passage, the people moving through it." "The passage?" Voss repeated softly. "Yes, why?" Voss did not answer. Instead, he turned slightly, his gaze moving along the deck, past the lounge windows, toward the stairwell where passengers came and went in an irregular flow. "Tenant," he said, "when a person wishes to observe without being observed, where do they stand?" Ardley followed his gaze. "I suppose, point of movement. Somewhere they can watch people pass without attracting attention." "Yes." "And the chair," Ardley began, then stopped. "Yes," Voss said. "The chair." Ardley looked at it again, more carefully this time. "It faces the passage," he said, "not the sea." "Just so. And you think she was watching someone?" "I think she was waiting," Voss said. "For whom?" "That," Voss replied, "is the question we have not yet asked correctly." Behind them, the lounge door opened. Dr. Martha Kessler stepped onto the deck. She moved with the same controlled economy Voss observed earlier. But there was a difference now, a slight tightening at the corners of her mouth, a subtle shift in the way she held her shoulders, as though she had accepted something she had not wished to consider, approached them without hesitation. "Lieutenant," she said, "the captain would like your statement." Ardley nodded quickly. "Yes, of course. Just." He stopped, glanced at Voss, then back at her. "I will come at once." He left, his steps quicker than before. Dr. Kessler remained. For a moment neither she nor Voss spoke. The wind had shifted again. It carried less salt now, more of the faint mechanical scent of the ship itself. Oil, heated metal, the quiet persistence of engines doing what they must. "You have read the letter," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Voss replied. "And you have seen the photograph?" "Yes." She looked at him directly. "Then you understand why suspicion falls where it does." "I understand," Voss said, "why it has been directed there." Dr. Kessler's expression did not change, but something in her gaze sharpened. "You believe it has been directed," she said. "I believe," Voss replied, "that the arrangement is too careful." She considered this. "And you think I am part of that arrangement?" "I think," Voss said, "that you are aware of more than you have said." A pause, not empty, waited. Dr. Kessler folded her gloves once, then again, as though reducing them to something smaller than their original shape. "Mrs. Ellingham spoke to me before luncheon," she said. "Yes." "She was afraid?" "Yes." "But not of her husband," Dr. Kessler said. Voss watched her. "That is not what she wrote," he said. "No," Dr. Kessler agreed. "It is not, and yet you say it." "I say," she replied, "fear is not always correctly assigned." Voss inclined his head slightly. Then, to whom did she assign it? Kessler did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked past him, toward the chair. "I have spent many years," she said slowly, "being trusted by people at the worst moments of their lives. They tell you things then, not clearly, not in order, but enough to understand what they cannot say directly." "And what did she tell you?" she said. Dr. Kessler replied that she had made a mistake. "Mistake of what kind?" "A mistake of belief," she said. "She had trusted someone she should not have trusted, and by the time she understood it, she believed it was too late." Voss's fingers touched the ribbon again. "And did she name this person?" "No, but you have an idea." Dr. Kessler met his gaze. "I have an impression," she said. "Impressions," Voss replied, "are often the beginning of truth, and sometimes the end of it," she said. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Voss said, "You were in the photograph?" "Yes." "With Mr. Ellingham?" "Yes." "Room on Rue des Oranges?" Dr. Kessler's mouth tightened. "Yes." "You know it?" "I have been there," she said. "For what purpose?" She hesitated. Then, very quietly, "For work." Voss did not move. What kind of work requires a private room, a concealed arrangement, and a man who prefers to remain unseen? Dr. Kessler's voice did not rise. The kind, she said, that people do not wish to discuss. And Mr. Ellingham's involvement. He brought patients, she said, women mostly, those who could not go elsewhere, those who needed discretion. Voss's gaze did not soften, and Mrs. Ellingham knew. Yes, and she disapproved. Yes, and that, Voss said, is what you believe frightened her. Dr. Kessler shook her head. No, she said, that is what should have frightened. A pause. The sea struck the hull with a dull, repetitive force, as though insisting on being acknowledged. Then what did? Voss asked. Dr. Kessler looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, she believed someone had followed her. Follow her where? From Gibraltar, she said, onto the ferry. Voss's expression did not change. And did you believe her? I did not dismiss it, Dr. Kessler said. And now? She looked toward the passage. Passengers moved through it, indistinct, shifting, each carrying their own small certainty. Now, she said, think she may have been correct. Voss reached into his pocket. He drew out the pale blue ribbon. He did not tie it. Instead, he held it between his fingers, letting it hang, as if waiting for something to justify its next knot. Doctor, he said quietly, there is a detail that troubles me. Yes, kindness, he said. She frowned slightly. What kindness? The bell, Voss said, rung 3 times. Not once, not twice. 3 times, and a person who wishes to summon help rings once, Voss said. A person in distress rings again. 3rd ringing, immediate, insistent. He looked at her. Suggests someone who wishes to ensure that help will come. Dr. Kessler's eyes widened, just slightly. You think, I think, Voss said, that someone was kind enough to call for assistance. A pause. That person, Dr. Kessler said slowly, was not Mrs. Ellingham. No. The wind rose again. The chair creaked, just once. No one had touched it. Dr. Kessler's voice dropped. Then whoever killed her, she said, remained long enough to summon help. Yes. To arrange the room. Yes. And to leave without being seen. Yes. She looked at him. That is not kindness, she said. No, Voss replied. It is control. He nodded. Exactly. Behind them the bell rang again, once sharp and clear. Not the cabin bell, the ship's bell, announcing nothing. Or perhaps, Voss thought, marking something that had already begun. Chapter 6. The door that was not locked. By early evening, Ferry had taken on a different personality. The light thinned. The sea darkened into a heavy, almost metallic blue. Lamps were lit inside the lounge, their amber glow turning faces into careful masks. Conversations resumed, but only in fragments, as if each speaker feared that a complete sentence might commit them to something they did not fully understand. Alaric Voss did not join the others, at first. He returned alone to the lower corridor. The passage to the cabin seemed narrower, now not physically, but in intention. The air held the faint smell of soap, layered over something sharper, recently applied. The door to Clara Ellingham's cabin had been re-secured, though the splintered wood near the latch remained visible, like a broken tooth no one had yet repaired. Voss stood before it. He did not enter. Instead, he looked at the floor. There were marks now that had not been there before. Subtle but present, the slight scuff of a heel turning too quickly. A faint smear where something had been dragged a fraction of an inch and then corrected. Someone had been careful, not careful enough. He bent slightly, examining the threshold. Then he straightened and knocked once. Not because he expected an answer, because it was a habit. From behind him, a voice said, "You do that as if the room might apologize, Miss Vale." She stood a few paces away, her notebooks tucked under her arm, her expression less sharp than before, but no less attentive. "I have found," she added, "that rooms rarely do. They often reveal," Voss said. "That is not the same thing." "No," he agreed, "it is not." She came closer, peering at the door. "Captain has had it closed," she said. "He does not wish for further disturbance. And yet you are here." "Dislike being told where not to look," he replied. "It suggests something has already been overlooked." Voss inclined his head slightly. "Then we are in agreement." She watched him for a moment. "You have not opened the letter again," she said. "People would have read it twice by now, if only to reassure themselves they had not misunderstood." "I have not misunderstood," Voss said. "That is a dangerous certainty." "It is a temporary one." Miss Vale smiled faintly. I begin to see why Mrs. Ellingham chose you. Choose is a strong word, Voss said. She anticipated, and you think she anticipated correctly. I think she anticipated something, he said. Whether it was the truth remains to be seen. Miss Vale leaned against the wall, crossing her arm. The captain has begun taking statement, she said. Ellingham was first. He spoke at length, which I suspect is his usual method of avoiding precision, and Lieutenant Ardley, earnest, slightly incoherent, entirely and Dr. Kessler, Miss Vale hesitated. Controlled, she said. Too controlled, not in a guilty way. Such distinctions matter, but in the way of someone who has decided exactly how much to reveal, and no more. Yes, Voss said quietly. That is often the more interesting position. Miss Vale tilted her head. You do not believe she killed Mrs. Ellingham? No, and yet she is connected to the photograph, to the room in Tangier, to the letter. Yes. Then, what is she? Voss looked again at the door. Yes, he said. Who does not yet understand what she has seen? Miss Vale considered that. And the husband? Voss did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached out and touched the door. Not the handle, not the broken latch, but the wood itself, just beside the frame. His fingers moved slightly, tracing something invisible. Then he stepped back. This door, he said, has been closed twice. Miss Vale frowned. That is not remarkable. It was broken open, then secured again. No, Voss said. Closed twice before it was broken. She straightened. How can you tell? The pressure marks, he said. The latch was engaged once, then disengaged, then engaged again. The wood bears the impression of both actions. It is not something one notices unless one is looking for it. And you were looking. I was counting, Voss said. Counting what? Actions. Miss Vale's eyes narrowed. You think someone entered the cabin after it had already been secured? I think, Voss said, that the story of the locked room is not as simple as it appears. She pushed herself away from the wall. Explain. Later, he said. That is intolerable. It is necessary. She opened her mouth to protest. At that moment, footsteps approached. Maurice Ellingham moved down the corridor with a measured calm that seemed newly acquired, as if he had decided that composure might serve him better than an irritation. His hair had been brushed back into order. His cuffs were dry. He stopped when he saw them. You have developed a fascination with my wife's cabin, he said. It is beginning to feel intrusive. Death is often intrusive, Miss Vale replied. Ellingham ignored her. You have spoken to the captain, he said to Voss. You have inspected the scene. You have collected whatever little curiosities interest you. I wonder, have you reached a conclusion? Are you still enjoying the process? I am observing, Voss said. Yes, Ellingham said. You have made that very clear. You observe. You do not accuse. You do not commit. It must be a comfortable position. It is an accurate one. Ellingham stepped closer. You think I killed her, he said quietly. I think, Voss replied, that you are very convenient. Ellingham's smile returned, but it was thinner now. You will find, he said, that convenience is not the same as truth. No, Voss said, but it is often used to disguise it. Ellingham's gaze flicked briefly to the door, then back to Voss. My wife was not a happy, he said. She had ideas, causes. She wished to improve things that do not improve. It made her restless, and restless people do foolish things. You believe she took poison herself. I believe she was capable of dramatics, Ellingham said, and of misjudgment. And the bell, Miss Vale asked suddenly. Ellingham glanced at her. What about it? It rang 3 times, she said, quickly, insistently, as if someone wished to ensure attention. Ellingham shrugged. Then she wished to be found, he said. There is nothing remarkable in that. Voss watched him. And yet, he said, you did not go to her immediately. Ellingham's expression hardened. I am not in the habit of responding to every bell my wife rings, he said. Marriage is not servitude. No, Voss said, but it is often expected. Ellingham's jaw tightened. You are playing a game, he said. No, Voss replied. I am listening. To what? To what does not fit, Voss said. Ellingham gave a short, dismissive laugh. Then you will listen for a long time, he said. Because nothing fits. That is the nature of accidents. He turned, as if to leave, then paused. One more thing, he added, without looking back. If you intend to accuse me, do so before we reach Tangier. I dislike unfinished conversations. Voss did not respond. Ellingham walked away. The corridor seemed quieter after his departure, though no sound had actually ceased. Miss Vale exhaled slowly. He is either very clever, she said, or very foolish. Both, Voss said. That is inconvenient. Yes. She looked at the door again. And this business of the latch, Voss raised a hand slightly. Not yet, he said. You enjoy this, she said. I enjoy understanding, he replied. And you are close. Voss considered that. Then he said, I am closer than I was. That is not reassuring. It is not intended to be. They moved back toward the stairs. As they emerged onto the deck, the atmosphere had shifted again. Passengers had gathered in small clusters, their conversations subdued but persistent. Mr. Benatar spoke quietly with Father Avellard near the rail, his gestures smaller than before. Lieutenant Ardley stood apart, staring out at the darkening sea, as if it might offer him a version of events he could accept. Dr. Kessler stood alone near the lounge door. She looked up as Voss approached. There is something else, she said. Yes? She hesitated, then spoke more quietly. I examined the glass again, she said. There is residue, as expected, but also, she paused, a second trace. Something that does not belong. What kind of trace? Not poison, she said. Something else. Something that suggests the glass was handled. After, Voss's eyes did not change. After the poison was taken. Yes. Miss Vale's voice sharpened. You mean someone touched the glass after Mrs. Ellingham drank from it? Yes. And arranged it? Yes. A pause. The wind moved across the deck, carrying the faint smell of salt and something colder. Then the room was not only staged, Miss Vale said. It was edited. Voss nodded. Exactly. Dr. Kessler looked at him. You have an idea, she said. Yes, and you will not share it. Not yet. She studied him for a moment. Then she said, You are waiting. Yes. For what? Voss turned his gaze toward the horizon. The first faint lights of Tangier had begun to appear, distant, uncertain, like thoughts not yet fully formed. For the moment, he said. When the arrangement, Miss Vale followed his gaze. When will that be? Voss's voice was very quiet. Soon, he said. Because whoever arranged this did not expect to be observed by someone who counts what is missing. Behind them, unnoticed, the cane chair shifted again, just slightly, as if something unseen had brushed past it in a hurry. Chapter 7. What the steward remembered too late. The steward did not wish to be important. That was the first thing Alaric Voss observed. He found the man in the service corridor just aft of the dining saloon, a narrow, overheated passage that smelled of soap, boiled vegetable, faint bitterness of coffee grounds thrown away before they had fully cooled. The steward stood beside a rack of folded linen, aligning them with an intensity that suggested the work was less about order than avoidance. His name, as the badge declared, was Emilio Rojas. He looked up when Voss approached, then immediately looked down again, as though eye contact might commit him to statements he had not yet rehearsed. Monsieur, he said, if you require anything, you must ask the purser. I am not authorized. I require only your memory, Voss said gently. It is, I think, the most valuable thing you have at present. Rojas gave a nervous laugh. My memory is not so good, sir. Many passengers, many cabins, is easy to confuse. It becomes more difficult, Voss said, when one is asked to remember a bell rung 3 times, the steward's hand, only for a fraction of a second, but long enough. You have told the captain, Voss continued. The bell from cabin 6 rang at 4:15, then again and again. You delayed because you assumed it was trivial. This is understandable. We all delay when we wish something to remain simple. Rojas swallowed. Yes, sir, that is what I said. And it is true, Voss said. The steward blinked. Of course it is true. But it is not complete, Voss added. Rojas's fingers tightened on the linen. Told everything I know. Then you will have no difficulty telling it again, Voss said. Slowly this time, without arranging it. The steward hesitated. The corridor seemed to narrow further, the heat pressing in with a quiet insistence. I heard the bell, Rojas said at last. Once, then again, then again. I was in the pantry. I had trays to prepare. It did not seem urgent. People ring for water, for towels, for nothing at all. And when you went to the cabin, after the 3rd ringing, I knocked. No answer. I tried the handle. It was locked. I called for help. Yes, Voss said. That is what you told the captain. Rojas nodded quickly. Yes, sir. And yet, Voss said, there is something you have not told him. The steward's face flushed. I have told everything. You have told what you are certain of, Voss said. I am asking for what you are not certain of. Rojas looked at him, then away. That is nothing, he said. Only confusion. Confusions are often the beginning of accuracy, Voss said. Tell me. A long pause. Then, reluctantly, when I heard the bell the first time, Rojas said I thought I heard something else. What? I do not know, he said quickly. A sound, not the bell. Before it. What kind of sound? Rojas closed his eyes briefly, as if listening again. A movement, he said, like something being set down or dropped. Not loud, just enough that I noticed it. And then the bell. Yes, and the second ringing? I was already listening then, Rojas said. It came quickly, too quickly perhaps, as if someone had not moved away from the bell at all. And the third the same, he said. Immediate. Insistent. Voss nodded. And when you went to the cabin, you found the door locked. Yes, you knocked. Yes. No answer. No. Voss regarded him quietly. Did you hear anything from inside? He asked. Rojas hesitated again. Not clearly, he said. But you heard something. The steward's voice dropped. I thought I heard breathing, he said. Or perhaps not breathing. Like someone trying not to make a sound. Miss Vale, who had arrived unnoticed at the far end of the corridor, drew in a sharp breath. Voss did not look at her. And after that? He asked. Nothing, Rojas said. Only the bell had stopped. There was no movement. I called for help. Voss inclined his head. You have done well, he said. Better than you think. Rojas looked at him with a mixture of relief and unease. I did not wish to cause trouble, he said. Trouble does not require your permission, Voss replied. He turned and left the corridor. Miss Vale fell into step beside him, her notebook already open. That changes everything, she said. It clarifies, Voss said. The bell was rung by someone who remained in the room, she continued. Someone who did not leave immediately. Yes. And the steward heard movement before the first ringing, she said. Something is being set down. Yes. She stopped walking. The glass, she said. Possibly. And the breathing. She hesitated. You think someone was still alive when he knocked? Yes. Miss Vale closed her notebook slowly. Then the timing, she began, is no longer consistent with a simple sequence. Voss finished. They reached the deck. The air was colder now. The lights of Tangier were clearer, scattered across the shoreline like fragments of something broken and reassembled without care. Passengers had gathered again, drawn by the approaching land. Maurice Ellingham stood among them, speaking with Mr. Benatar. He looked at ease. Too much at ease. Lieutenant Ardley stood apart, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Dr. Kessler watched the crowd, not the sea. Voss moved toward her. There is something you must consider, he said. She turned to him. Yes. The steward heard movement before the bell, Voss said. Something like breathing when he knocked. Dr. Kessler's expression changed. Then she was still alive, she said. Yes. Someone else was with her. Yes. A pause. And that person did not answer the door. No. Dr. Kessler's gaze shifted toward the others. Then whoever it was remained long enough to ensure the outcome, she said. And then what? Waited? Listened? Arranged the scene? Yes. Miss Vale joined them, and left without being seen, through a locked door. Dr. Kessler shook her head slightly. No, she said. That is not possible. Voss looked at her. It is, he said. If the door was not locked when the steward first knocked, silence fell between them. Miss Vale spoke first. You said earlier the latch had been engaged twice, she said. Once before and once after. Yes. Then the door was locked after the steward's first attempt, or just before the second, Voss said. Dr. Kessler's voice was very quiet, which means, she said, that the person inside the cabin heard the knocking and chose not to answer. Yes. And then secured the door. Yes. Miss Vale exhaled slowly. That is not panic, she said. That is control. Exactly, Voss said. They stood in silence for a moment, the implications settling into place. Then Miss Vale said, There is something else. Yes, the letter, she said, directs suspicion toward the husband. It introduces the doctor. It mentions the room in Tangier. It prepares us to see a path. Yes. And yet, she said, if someone else was in that cabin, someone who stayed, who arranged, who locked the door, then the letter is not merely a warning. No, Voss said, it is a guide. Yes. Miss Vale's eyes widened slightly. Then Mrs. Ellingham was not only afraid, she said. She was trying to tell you something. Yes. And she did not finish. No. Dr. Kessler looked at Voss. What did she not say? She asked. Voss reached into his pocket. He drew out the pale blue ribbon. He held it between his fingers, considering it. Then, slowly, he tied another knot. She did not say, he said, that she had already met the person she feared. Miss Vale's voice dropped. Think it was someone on the ferry. Yes, and someone she trusted, Dr. Kessler added. Voss nodded. Yes, they all turned, almost unconsciously, toward the group of passengers. Maurice Ellingham laughed at something Mr. Benatar had said. Lieutenant Ardley stared at the sea. Father Avler murmured to himself, his fingers moving over his rosary. The ferry moved steadily toward Tangier. Closer, closer. And among them, Voss thought, stood the person who had rung the bell, not to save a life, but to ensure its meaning would be misunderstood. He watched them. And for the first time since Clara Ellingham had been found, he allowed himself the smallest shift in certainty. Not about the method, not about the arrangement, but about the intention. This had not been done in haste. It had been done with patience, and patience, he knew, belonged to those who had waited far longer than a single crossing of the sea. Behind him, the cane chair creaked once more. This time, Voss did not turn to look, because he already knew the person who had moved it last was still very close. Chapter 8. The detail that refused to belong. The ferry did not slow yet, but it felt as though it had. That was the curious illusion of nearing land. The engines continued their steady labour. The hull cut the water without hesitation, and yet something in the atmosphere shifted, if the journey itself had begun to reconsider its purpose. Passengers gathered along the rails. Some spoke of arrival, others of arrangements waiting ashore. A few, those who had not yet decided what they believed about the death, spoke of nothing at all. Alaric Voss did not join them. He returned once more to the deck chair. This time he sat. It was not a comfortable chair. The cane had loosened slightly with age, giving just enough beneath his weight to suggest fragility rather than rest. Position faced the passage exactly as before, the narrow corridor of movement between the lounge and the promenade. From here, one could see everything. Not clearly, not completely, but sufficiently. Miss Vale stood nearby, though she pretended to be occupied with her notes. "Taken possession of it," she said without looking. "I have accepted its invitation," Voss replied. "That is a distinction without mercy. Most useful distinctions are." She closed her notebook. "You believe the person we are looking for used position," she said. "Yes." "To watch?" "Yes." "And to wait?" "Yes." Miss Vale turned then, her attention sharpening. "For whom?" Voss did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the passage. Passengers moved through it in small, irregular intervals. A couple arguing softly. A man adjusting his hat as though it mattered greatly. A steward carrying a tray too carefully. Each passed through the frame of the space, then disappeared. "Not for a person," Voss said at last. "For a moment." Miss Vale frowned. "That sounds unnecessarily philosophical." "It is precise," he said. She considered this. "And the moment came," she said. "Yes." And when it came, required no hesitation. Miss Vale looked at him. "You are very close," she said. "Yes." "And yet you still do not say it." "No. That is intolerable. It is necessary." She exhaled almost sharply. "Very well," she said. "Then let us speak of what does not belong. That seems to be your preferred." Voss inclined his head slightly. "An excellent suggestion." She gestured toward the passage. "Chair has been moved," she said. "The almonds were removed. The napkin was added. Someone is adjusting details after the fact." "Yes." "The glass was handled after the poison was taken." "Yes." "The door was locked twice." "Yes." "The bell was rung by someone other than the victim." "Yes." Miss Vale crossed her arms. "All of these things suggest control," she said. "Arrangement. Deliberate shaping of the scene." "Yes." "And yet," she continued, "there must be something that does not fit, something that resists this arrangement." Voss looked at her. "There is." And he reached into his pocket. He removed the envelope. Miss Vale leaned forward slightly. "The letter?" "No," Voss said. He opened it, carefully. From within, he took the photograph once more. He held it up, not for her, but for the light. "The reflection," he said. Miss Vale stepped closer. "Yes." "In the window," Voss continued. "Third presence. Someone watching." "Yes." "And yet," he said, "Mrs. Ellingham does not mention this person in her letter." Vale's expression changed. "She speaks of fear," she said, "of her husband, of the doctor, of the room, but not in the third figure." "Yes." "You think that matters?" "I think," Voss said, "that it is the only thing that matters." Miss Vale stared at the photograph. "Then she did not see them," she said. "Or she did not understand what she saw," Voss replied, a pause. "And if she did not understand it," Miss Vale said slowly, "then she could not have written about it." "Yes." "And the person in the reflection," she stopped, eyes lifted from the photograph. "They were present then," she said. "In Tangier, in the room." "Yes." "And now?" "They are here," Voss said. Miss Vale's breath caught, just slightly, and Mrs. Ellingham recognised them. "Not fully," Voss said, "but enough, and trusted them." "Yes." Miss Vale turned toward the passage again. Passengers continued to move, unaware, uncertain, visible. "Then we are not looking for someone who hides," she said. "No, someone who waits," she added. "Yes, and someone who was expected. Yes." Miss Vale's voice dropped. "That narrows it considerably." "It does." She looked at him. "Then why do you not name them?" Voss folded the photograph again. "Because," he said, "they are about to reveal themselves." Miss Vale followed his gaze. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then Dr. Martha Kessler stepped into the passage. She moved, as she always did, calm, controlled, unhurried, but there was something different now. Not in her posture, but in her attention. She was not observing the passengers. She was watching the chair, watching Voss. Miss Vale's voice tightened. I think, Voss said quietly, that she has understood something." Dr. Kessler approached. She stopped a few paces away. "You wish to speak to me," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Voss burrowed. "And now," he said, "I will ask you something very simple." She waited. "In the photograph," Voss said, holding it slightly toward her, "there is a reflection. Third person. Did you know they were there?" Dr. Kessler did not look at the photograph. "Yes," she said. Miss Vale's head snapped toward her. "You knew," she said. "Yes, and you did not mention it." "No." "Why?" Dr. Kessler's gaze remained on Voss. "Because," she said, "I did not believe it was relevant." Voss nodded slightly. "And now?" "Now," she said, "I believe it is everything." A pause. Wind moved across the deck, colder now. "And who was it?" Voss asked. Dr. Kessler hesitated. Not long, but long enough. Then she said, "A man." Miss Vale made a small, frustrated sound. "That is not helpful." "He was not important," Dr. Kessler said. "At least, I did not think so." He came and went. He spoke little. He watched more than he spoke. Voss's fingers tightened slightly on the ribbon. "And Mr. Ellingham knew him?" "Yes." "And Mrs. Ellingham's saw him?" "Yes." "And you dismissed him?" "Yes." "Why?" Dr. Kessler's expression shifted. "For the same reason," she said, "that one dismisses furniture." A silence. Miss Vale looked from one to the other. "I do not understand," she said. Voss stood. He placed the photograph back into the envelope. Then he said very quietly, "Because he was always there." Miss Vale's breath caught. "You mean—" "Yes." "On the ferry?" "Yes." "And we have not noticed him?" "No," Voss said. "We have noticed him perfectly." Miss Vale stared at him. "Then why?" "Because," Voss said, "he has never required attention." Dr. Kessler's voice was barely audible. "I see it now," she said. Voss looked at her. "Yes," he said, "you do." Miss Vale turned slowly, her gaze moving across the deck, the passage, the rail, figures standing and moving and speaking. "Which one?" she whispered. Voss did not answer. Instead, he looked past them, toward a figure who had just emerged from the lower deck. The steward, Emilio Rojas. He carried a tray. He moved quietly, unremarkable. He had done all day. Miss Vale's voice broke slightly. "No," she said. Voss's expression did not change. "Yes," he said. "Doctor." Kessler closed her eyes briefly. "The reflection," she said. "In the photograph, he was there, in the background, carrying something." "Yes." "Mrs. Ellingham saw him." "Yes, and did not understand." "No." Miss Vale shook her head. "But why?" Voss raised a hand. "Not yet," he said. Steward moved past them. He did not look at them. He did not slow. He did not change. He passed through the passage, into the lounge. Gone. Miss Vale exhaled slowly. "That is impossible," she said. "No," Voss replied. "It is inevitable." Dr. Kessler looked at him. "You are certain?" "Yes." "And you will confront him?" "Yes." "When?" Voss turned his gaze toward the lights of Tangier. They were close now, close enough to resolve into buildings, into streets, into places where things could be hidden or revealed. "Soon," he said, "before we arrive." Miss Vale's voice dropped. "And if you are wrong?" Voss's answer was very quiet. "Then," he said, "the arrangement will hold." A pause. "And if you are right?" Voss looked back toward the passage, where the steward had disappeared. "Then," he said, "it will break." Behind them, cane chair creaked once more. This time it did not settle back into stillness. It remained very slightly out of alignment. Chapter 9. The man no one watched. It was decided without being announced. People gathered in the lounge because they did not wish to remain alone, stood closer than necessary, spoke more quietly than usual, and watched one another with a polite attention that had become something sharper. The lamps cast a steady amber light, flattening expression and making uncertainty easier to conceal. Captain Herrera stood near the barometer. He had the look of a man who had agreed, reluctant to allow events to take a shape he did not entirely approve of, but would not interrupt so long as they remained within certain boundaries. "Briefly," he said. "We will do this briefly." "Briefness," Miss Vale murmured, "is often the enemy of clarity." "No," Herrera replied without looking at her. "It is the enemy of delay." Alaric Voss stood near the centre of the room, not commanding it, not claiming it, simply occupying the one position from which he could see everyone without turning his head. Dr. Kessler stood to one side, her hands now free of gloves, her black bag resting at her feet. Father Avellard remained near her, though he did not look at her. Tenant Ardley stood by the window, his shoulders rigid, as though bracing against something he could not yet name. Maurice Ellingham leaned against the bar. He held a glass he had not yet drunk from. His expression suggested amusement, but his fingers betrayed him, tapping once, twice against the rim, as though counting something he wished to control. Emilio Rojas, the steward, stood near the doorway. He had not been invited forward. He had placed himself there, tray in hand, as always, unobtrusive, available, invisible. Voss let the silence extend just long enough that it became uncomfortable. Then he spoke. "This is not a question of who could have done it," he said. "That is the least interesting part of the matter. Many people could have done it. Opportunity is generous. Motive is rarely scarce." Herrera shifted slightly. "And yet," Voss continued, "we have been encouraged to believe that this is a simple case. A husband, a quarrel, a poison, a locked room. It is a story that arranges itself convenient." Ellingham gave a small, dry laugh. "I am flattered to be so central to your narrative." "You are central," Voss said, "but not in the way you suppose." Miss Vale's pencil moved once. Still, Voss turned slightly. "To begin," he said, "we must consider the bell." A murmur moved through the room. 3 times it was rung. Voss continued quickly, insistently, as though someone wished to ensure attention. "The steward has confirmed. He has also confirmed that he heard movement before the first ringing, and something like breathing when he knocked. Rojas shifted his weight, was almost imperceptible. Voss noticed. "This tells us something very simple," Voss said. "Mrs. Ellingham was not alone when she died." Dr. Kessler inclined her head slightly. "Yes. And that person," Voss continued, "remained in the room long enough to ring the bell, long enough to arrange the scene, long enough to ensure that when the door was finally opened, the story would already have been written." Herrera spoke. "And yet the door was locked." "Yes," Voss said, "but not when it first appeared to be." A sharper murmur. Miss Vale did not write. She watched. "The door," Voss said, "was closed twice. The latch engaged, disengaged, then engaged again. This tells us that someone left the room and then returned." Ellingham straightened slightly. "That is absurd," he said. "No one saw." "No one saw," Voss agreed, "because no one was looking." He turned then, not to Ellingham, but toward the doorway, where the steward stood, tray still in hand, still, always still. "You were not looking," Voss said softly, "because you had already decided what was worth noticing." Rojas blinked. "Sir?" he said. Voss took a step forward. "You move through this ship," he said, "without being observed. You are present in every corridor, every cabin, every moment that requires service. You are seen but not considered." "That is my duty, sir," Rojas said quickly. "Yes," Voss said. "It is a pause, and it is also to your advantage." Room shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. Rojas's fingers tightened on the tray. "I do not understand," he said. "You understand perfectly," Voss replied. He reached into his pocket. He removed the envelope. "This letter," he said, "directs suspicion toward Mr. Ellingham. It introduces Dr. Kessler. It mentions a room in Tangier. It prepares us to see a pattern that is both plausible and elite." Ellingham smiled thinly. "At last," he said. "Yes," Voss said, "at last." He turned slightly, so that his gaze moved between Ellingham and the steward. "The photograph," he could, "shows Mr. Ellingham and Dr. Kessler outside that room. Also shows something else." He held it up. "A reflection," he said. "A third figure. Present, but unacknowledged." Dr. Kessler's voice was quiet. "I did not think it mattered." "No," Voss said. "You did not," Miss Vale's voice cut in, "and Mrs. Ellingham did not mention it in the letter, because she did not understand it," Voss said. He looked directly at Rojas. "But she saw it," he said. Rojas's face had begun to lose its colour. "I have never been to Tangier," he said. "That is not what I said," Voss replied. A pause. "You were there," Voss said, "in the room, carrying something, passing through, invisible." Rojas shook his head. "No," he said. "No, that is not. You are always carrying something," Voss said. "That is how you are seen and how you are not." The tray trembled slightly. Herrera stepped forward. "Enough," he said. "If you are making an accusation, I am making a version," Voss said. "And I am saying it is insufficient," Herrera replied. Voss inclined his head. "Then let us complete it." He turned back to Rojas. "You heard the bell," he said. 3 times. You told us this. You also heard movement before the first ringing, and something like breathing when you knocked." Rojas's lips parted. "Yes," he said. "And yet," Voss continued, "you did not open the door immediately. You waited. You got help, yes. Why?" Rojas hesitated. "I thought it was not urgent." "No," Voss said. "You thought it was very urgent." A silence fell. "You thought," Voss said, "that you had not yet finished." Rojas's grip on the tray tightened further. "That is not true," he said. "It is exactly true," Voss replied. He stepped closer. "You entered the cabin before the bell rang," he said. "You gave Mrs. Ellingham the almond. You knew they were sweet enough to disguise what had been added. You remained while she began to feel its effect." Rojas shook his head. "No, you set down the glass," Voss continued. "Just as the steward's memory recalled. You waited. You watched. You ensured that she understood, at least for a moment, what was happening." Dr. Kessler's voice was very quiet. "That is why there were marks of hesitation," she said. "Yes," Voss said. Miss Vale's breath caught. "And then he rang the bell," she said. "Yes, 3 times. Yes, to ensure she would be found. Yes." Rojas's voice broke. "I did not. And then," Voss said, "you left." A pause. "But the door," Herrera said. "It was locked." "Yes," Voss said, "because he returned." The room held its breath. "You left the cabin," Voss said to Rojas. "You waited in the corridor. You listened. The steward knocked. You did not answer. You allowed the moment to pass. And then, before the second or third ringing, you returned, secured the latch, and ensured that the room would tell the story you had written." Rojas's hands shook. The tray slipped. It did not fall. "Not yet." "Why?" Herrera demanded. "Because," Voss said, "he had already begun writing it long before this crossing." He looked at Rojas. "You were in Tangier," he said. "You saw Mr. Ellingham and Dr. Kessler. You saw the room. You understood its purpose. You understood the vulnerabilities it created." Rojas's voice was barely audible. "I did not." "You watched," Voss said, "as you always do." A pause. "And Mrs. Ellingham saw you," he continued. "Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Enough to feel that something was wrong. Enough to write the letter," Miss Vale whispered. "Yes," Voss said. He knew she had seen him. Dr. Kessler's voice was steady, but softer now. "And so he arranged it," she said. "Yes." "To appear as something else." "Yes." Rojas's shoulders slumped. The tray slipped from his hands. It struck the floor with a sharp, hollow sound. No one moved. For a moment he said nothing. Then, very quietly, "She was not meant to understand," he said. Voss did not interrupt. "She saw too much," Rojas continued. "Not clearly, but enough. Enough to speak. Enough to ruin everything." "What's everything?" Herrera demanded. Rojas looked up, at last, at all of them. "In the room," he said. "At work. What was done there. She would have told me. Not out of cruelty, but out of righteousness. And righteousness." He stopped, searching for the word. "It destroys quietly, but completely." Miss Vale's voice was low. "So you killed her." Rojas shook his head. "I ended the problem," he said. The words hung in the air. Unpleasant, precise. Voss watched him. "The bell?" he asked. Rojas's expression shifted. Something like regret passed across it. "Someone had to find her," he said. "It would have been worse otherwise." A pause. "Worse," Miss Vale said. "Yes," Rojas said. "Meaningless." Silence. Herrera stepped forward. "You will come with me," he said. Rojas did not resist. He did not look at anyone. As he was led away, passed through the same space he had occupied all day, unnoticed, until now. The door closed behind him. The room exhaled. Miss Vale sank into a chair. "That," she said, "was not the story I expected?" "No," Voss said quietly. "It rarely is." Ellingham set down his glass. "You have made a mistake," he said. Voss looked at him. "No," he said. "I have completed one." Ellingham's expression did not change, but something behind it did. And Voss, watching, tied one final knot in the pale blue ribbon, because the story, he knew, was not yet finished. Chapter 10. The man who had already been forgiven. The ferry lights of Tangier had drawn closer, resolving into terraces, windows, and narrow streets that climbed one over another, like arguments no one had settled. The shoreline looked calm from a distance. It rarely was. Inside the lounge, something else had begun to settle. Not relief, not yet, but a kind of quiet that follows a conclusion offered too soon. Captain Herrera remained by the door, through which Emilio Rojas had been taken. He did not move immediately after it closed. His hand rested on the handle as though testing whether it might open again without his permission. Miss Vale sat very still, her notebook closed in her lap. She did not write. Dr. Kessler had not moved either. Her hands rested on the back of a chair, fingers lightly touching the wood, as if confirming its presence. Lieutenant Ardley looked from one face to another, waiting for someone to tell him what to believe next. Maurice Ellingham stood apart. He had not spoken since Rojas was taken. Now slowly, he picked up his glass again. "Remarkable," he said. His voice had regained its earlier ease, but something beneath it had sharpened. One hardly knows whether to admire the neatness of it or regret the inconvenience. Miss Vale looked up. "Inconvenience?" she said. "Yes," Ellingham replied. "A steward with ambition, a misplaced sense of importance. These things happen. It is unfortunate, of course, but hardly," he gestured vaguely, "hardly profound." Voss watched him. "You are relieved," he said. Ellingham smiled. "I am practical," he replied. "Your wife is dead," Lieutenant Ardley said, his voice unsteady. "Yes," Ellingham said, "and the man responsible has been identified. One must take satisfaction where one can." Miss Vale's expression hardened. "You do not even pretend," she said. "Pretense is exhausting," Ellingham replied, "and unnecessary when matters resolve themselves so convenient." Voss stepped forward. "They have not resolved," he said. Ellingham's smile did not falter. "On the contrary," he said, "they have resolved perfectly. You have your culprit. The captain has his authority. The rest of us have our passage to complete." "And the letter?" Voss asked. Ellingham's gaze flicked just once. "A woman's fears," he said. "Exaggerated, misplaced. Now, and the photograph? A coincidence. And the room in Tangier?" Ellingham took a sip of his drink. "Necessity," he said. "You would be surprised how often necessity requires discretion." Voss inclined his head. "Yes," he said. "I would not." Pause. "Then you knew him," Voss said. Ellingham's eyes returned to him. "Whom?" "The steward," Voss said. "Emilio Rojas." Ellingham laughed softly. "I know all my servants, Monsieur Voss. It is a habit of my class." "You knew him before this crossing?" "No," Ellingham said. "I did not. You saw him in Tangier. I have seen many men in many places." "And yet," Voss said, "he knew you." Ellingham's smile thinned. "That is hardly surprising," he said. "I am not an obscure man." Voss reached into his pocket. He removed the envelope once more. Miss Vale's eyes lifted. "The letter again," she said. "Yes," Voss replied. He unfolded it carefully. "You will recall," he said, "that Mrs. Ellingham wrote of a woman in Tangier, a woman with a black medical bag. She believed this woman represented a danger to her." Dr. Kessler did not move. "And yet," Voss continued, "she did not mention the third figure in the photograph, the man in the reflection, the one who passed unnoticed." Miss Vale leaned forward slightly. "Yes." "Why?" Voss asked. No one answered. "Because." Voss said she did not understand him. She did not recognize his importance. He looked at Ellingham. "But you did." Ellingham's expression did not change. "I am afraid you will have to be more precise," he said. "I will," Voss replied. He took a step closer. "You arranged the room in Tangier," he said. "You brought women there. You relied on discretion, in silence, on the assumption that what was done there would remain there." Ellingham said nothing. "You employed Dr. Kessler for her skill," Voss continued, "and you employed others less visible for their silence." A pause. "The steward," Miss Vale said softly. "Yes," Voss said. Ellingham's fingers tapped the glass once more. "And what of it?" he said. "You trusted him," Voss said, "because he was invisible, because he moved without being seen, because he carried what others did not question. And that," Ellingham said, "is hardly a crime." "No," Voss said, "but it is a mistake." Ellingham's smile returned. "You are reaching," he said. "Am I?" Voss replied. He lifted the letter slightly. "Mrs. Ellingham believed you intended to kill her," he said. "That is what she wrote. That is what she feared." "Yes," Ellingham said. "Mistaken." "Yes," Voss said. Silence fell. Miss Vale's eyes widened slightly. Then she began. "Yes," Voss said. "She was mistaken about the method." He looked at Ellingham. "But not about the danger." Ellingham's gaze sharpened. "You are playing with words," he said. "No," Voss replied. "I am removing them." He folded the letter once more. Rojas killed her, he said. That is true. He administered the poison. He arranged the scene. He rang the bell. Yes, Ellingham said. We have established that. But he did not act alone, Voss said. A pause. Herrera stepped forward. If you are suggesting, I am starting, Voss said. He turned fully to Ellingham. You did not need to kill your wife, he said. You only needed to ensure that someone else would. Ellingham's expression did not change. You are making a serious accusation, he said. Yes, Voss replied. And on what basis? Voss's voice was calm. On the basis of timing, he said. Arrangement. Of expectation. He took another step. You knew she had seen something in Tangier, he said. Something she did not understand, but would eventually question. You knew she would speak. Not out of malice, but out of conviction. Ellingham said nothing. So you created a situation, Voss continued, in which her fear would be directed toward you. You allowed her to believe you were the danger. You encouraged it. Miss Vale's voice was barely audible. The letter, she said. Yes, Voss said. The letter was written because she feared him. He gestured toward Ellingham. And that fear, he said, was useful. Ellingham's eyes narrowed. You are constructing a narrative, he said. I am revealing one, Voss replied. He continued. You did not instruct Rojas directly, he said. That would have been crude. Instead, you allowed him to understand. You allowed him to see that Mrs. Ellingham was a threat. To the room, to work, to everything he believed necessary. Dr. Kessler's voice broke slightly. He believed he was protecting it. Yes, Voss said. And you, Miss Vale said to Ellingham, allowed that belief. Ellingham's silence was no longer comfortable. It was deliberate. Voss watched him. You created the conditions, he said. You ensured that when the moment came, Rojas would act. Not for you, but for what he believed you represented. Herrera's voice was sharp. That is not the same as guilt. No, Voss said. It is more subtle. He looked at Ellingham. You did not poison your wife, he said. You arranged for her to be poisoned. A pause. And you ensured, Voss continued, that it would appear to be your doing. Miss Vale's breath caught. That is madness, she said. No, Voss replied. It is control. He turned to Herrera. He expected to be suspected, he said. He expected the letter to be found. He expected the narrative to form around him. Herrera frowned. Why? Because, Voss said, it would draw attention away from the truth. A silence. And what is the truth? Herrera asked. Voss looked at Ellingham. The truth, he said, is that he has been doing this for years. Dr. Kessler closed her eyes. Yes, she said. Miss Vale looked between them. Doing what? She asked. Voss's voice was very quiet. Deciding, he said, which lives are inconvenient. The room held its breath. Ellingham's glass was empty. He set it down, carefully. You cannot prove any of this, he said. No, Voss replied. Not here, not now. Then it is meaningless. No, Voss said. It is inevitable. Ellingham's expression shifted. For the first time, something like uncertainty appeared. You think this will follow me, he said. Yes, Voss said. And you? Voss inclined his head slightly. I will remember, he said. A pause. Ellingham laughed. Not loudly, not easily. But you cannot act, he said. No, Voss replied. Then what have you achieved? Voss looked at him. Clarity, he said. The ferry slowed, not abruptly, but enough that the change could be felt beneath the feet. Tangier is closed now, close enough to step into, close enough to disappear. Ellingham turned away. He did not look back, and as he moved toward the door, Voss untied one knot in the pale blue ribbon, not because he was uncertain, but because he had understood something that required no further tightening. The story had not ended. It had only changed where it would continue. 11. The distance between arrival and escape. The ferry touched the harbour with a restraint that suggested experience rather than caution. No one applauded. No one spoke. There was only the low, controlled impact of the hull against the dock, the heavy sigh of ropes thrown and caught, a faint, distant murmur of Tangier. You receiving another group of strangers who believed themselves distinct. Passengers began to gather their belongings. Movement returned. Not natural movement. Deliberate movement, kind that follows an interruption, one would prefer to consider concluded. Alaric Voss did not move immediately. He stood at the rail, looking not at the city, but at the water between the ferry and the dock, a narrow strip of dark surface that seemed for a moment to belong to neither. Miss Vale joined him. You will not stop him, she said. It was not a question. No, Voss replied. And you will not follow? No, that is unsatisfactory. Yes, She looked at him. You have identified the truth, she said. You have exposed the mechanism, named the intention, and yet he will walk away. Yes. Miss Vale closed her notebook. I have spent my life believing that stories conclude, she said. That there is a moment at which everything aligns, and the world is made briefly comprehensible. And now, Voss asked. Now, she said. I suspect that alignment is merely a convenience we impose. Voss inclined his head slightly. A useful one, he said, but not a reliable one. Behind them, Dr. Kessler approached. She had her bag in hand now, not as an object of work, but as something to be carried away. I have given my statement, she said, to the authorities here. It will not be sufficient. No, Voss said. They will take Rojas, she continued. They will question him. They will record what he says. And then they will close the matter, Miss Vale said. Yes. Dr. Kessler looked toward the gangway, where Maurice Ellingham stood, waiting, not impatiently, not anxiously, simply waiting, as though this too had been anticipated. I should have seen it, she said quietly. Voss did not respond immediately. I believe, she continued, that I understood the nature of what we were doing, that I could separate necessity from harm, that I could choose where to draw the line. Now? Miss Vale asked. Dr. Kessler's expression did not change. Now I see, she said, that the line was never mine to draw. A pause. And him? Miss Vale said, nodding toward Ellingham. Dr. Kessler's gaze followed. He does not draw lines, she said. He removes them. Voss watched Ellingham. The man stood with his luggage at his feet, speaking briefly with an official from the harbour. His manner was composed. His movements are precise. He had already stepped into the next version of himself, the one that would exist on land, where this crossing would become a story told different if it were told at all. He will continue, Dr. Kessler said. Yes, Voss replied. There is nothing we can do. Voss did not answer. Miss Vale spoke instead. There is something, she said. Dr. Kessler looked at what? Miss Vale's voice was steady. We can remember correctly. A pause. Voss inclined. Yes, he said. That is something. The gangway was lowered. Passengers began to disembark, one by one, in order, as though sequence might restore meaning. Lieutenant Ardley passed them, his expression still unsettled. I do not understand, he said. No, Miss Vale replied. You do not. Will you? He began, looking at Voss. Will you do anything? Voss regarded him. I have already done what I can, he said. Ardley hesitated. Then he nodded, though it was clear he did not accept it. He moved on. Father Avallard followed, murmuring a prayer under his breath, though whether it was for the living or the dead was not clear. Dr. Kessler waited. Then she turned to Voss. There will be others, she said. Rooms. Other arrangements. Yes. And you will not be there. No. She studied him for a moment. Then what is the point? She asked. Voss considered this. Then he said, understanding is not a guarantee of change. No, she said. But it is the beginning of it, he added. Dr. Kessler nodded once. Then she turned and walked toward the gangway. Miss Vale watched her go. She will not return to that work, she said. No, Voss replied. That is something. Yes. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Miss Vale said, and him? Voss did not look away from Ellingham. He believes himself safe, he said. And is he? Voss's hand moved to the pale blue ribbon. He untied another knot. There is a difference, he said, between being unpunished and being unobserved. Miss Vale followed his gaze. Ellingham stepped onto the gangway. He did not look back. Will he think of this? She asked. Yes, Voss said. Will it matter? Voss considered that. Then he said, yes. Miss Vale exhaled slowly. Not enough, she said. No, Voss agreed. Not enough. The ferry began to empty. The space changed again. Not quieter, just less occupied. Voss remained at the rail. The narrow strip of water between the ferry and the dock had disappeared. Now it was only wood and rope and the solid fact of arrival. Miss Vale closed her notebook. I will write it, she said. Yes. Not as it happened. No, Voss said. As it was understood, she said. He inclined his head. That is the only way it can be written. She looked at him. And you? Voss took the ribbon from his pocket. He untied the final knot. Then he folded it once more, as it had been at the beginning. I will remember, he said. Miss Vale studied him for a moment. You do not seem satisfied, she said. I am not, Voss replied. That is unfortunate. It is accurate. A pause. Will you stay in Tangier, she asked, for a time? And then? Elsewhere. She smiled faintly. That seems appropriate. Yes. They walked toward the gangway together. At the threshold, Miss Vale paused. One last question, she said. Yes? The chair, she said. Why did it matter? Voss considered this. Then he said, Because it showed me where to stand. Miss Vale nodded. That is almost disappointingly simple. Most things are, Voss said. She stepped onto the dock. He followed. Behind them the Santa Aurelia remained, its decks now emptying, purpose already shifting toward the next crossing. Before leaving the gangway, Voss turned once more, not to look at the ship, but at the place where the chair had been. It stood there still, slightly out of alignment. Something had passed through it and left no trace but that. Voss watched it for a moment. Then he turned away and walked into Tangier.